Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another Brewer's Minute. So there's been one card from Kaladesh that I've gotten a ton of questions about this week, and that card is Dubious Challenge. So I figured that maybe this would be the time and the place for us to break down all things Dubious Challenge. So today, for our Brewer's Minute, we're going to be talking about how Dubious Challenge actually works, and then some potential uses for Dubious Challenge in both Standard and in Modern. So first off, we got to break down the card because there's been some misconceptions and some confusions over how it actually works. So Dubious Challenge, first off, you got to pay 4 mana, 1 of it green. It's a sorcery, so you got to do it during your turn. You get to look at, that's a key term there, the top 10 cards of your library, and then you can exile up to 2 creature cards from among them and shuffle your library. So one thing that confused people, and we should get out of the way right away, is that what happens to the other 8 cards? It doesn't specifically say put those cards on the bottom of your library or anything like that. But remember, you're just looking at these cards. So technically, they're still part of your library. So when you shuffle, the other 8 cards, or any cards that you don't exile, maybe you only exile 1 creature, or maybe you whiff completely on creatures, all the other cards are already still in your library because you're just looking at them, so they will automatically get shuffled back in. So wanted to clear that up. And then as far as what it actually does, you exile 2 creatures, and then your opponent gets first choice, and they may choose up to 1 of them. May is another key term there. Your opponent doesn't have to choose a creature, so you can't really get the combo kill with, say, Phage, which would kill the opponent if it entered the battlefield under their control and it wasn't cast. But your opponent can just be like, no, I don't want that. And then you have to take any creatures that are left over. So if you get 2 creatures, your opponent chooses which one they want. If they choose one, they get one, you get the leftover one. If your opponent says, no, I don't want any creatures, you get both of them. That is not a May ability, you have to do it. So actually flipping a Phage off Dubious Challenge in almost any situation would be very bad, because your opponent would be like, no thanks, I don't want that. And you would have to take it once you exile it. Of course, you choose up to 2 cards, so you wouldn't have to choose Phage, but once you choose them in exile, you are getting those cards, whatever ones your opponent doesn't choose. So how can we really make Dubious Challenge work? And I should say, by work, I mean in casual decks, maybe in Commander, possibly in like Against the Odds, fun decks. I don't expect Dubious Challenge to be breaking any Standard or Modern formats or being a Tier 1 deck, but what kind of synergies do we have to build around? So first off, in Standard, probably the easiest way to break Dubious Challenge is Long Road Home and Eldrazi Displacer. They're cards that let you exile a creature, and then you return the creature to the battlefield under its owner's control. So with Dubious Challenge, if you hit 2 creatures, your opponent's going to get 1, you get 1. But if you have Long Road Home, you can simply exile the creature that your opponent chose, and then you end up with both creatures. So for 6 mana with Long Road Home, or 7 mana with Eldrazi Displacer, and for the cost of 2 cards, basically, you end up getting both creatures off Dubious Challenge and making it this really weird, build around me, kind of janky, super powered collected company effect. So in Standard, that's the easiest way to do it. So what do you want to be hitting off Dubious Challenge in Standard? I think the single best thing you can do in Standard with Dubious Challenge is set up Gisela and Bruna to meld into Bracella. The sweet thing about this is neither card really does anything when they enter the battlefield. Bruna triggers when it's cast, so your opponent won't get to reanimate anything if they get the Bruna off the Dubious Challenge. And then you just Eldrazi Displacer / Long Road Home, whichever one you happen to have, get back on your side of the battlefield, whichever one your opponent chose. And since Dubious Challenge is a sorcery, this is happening on your turn, so on your end step, you meld into Bracella, and Bracella is super good and hard to beat. The other possibility, a little bit jankier, but there's an infinite combo with Wisp Weaver Angel. If you get 2 Wisp Weaver Angels at the same time, you can basically just exile one to the other and keep going back and forth in a loop that gives you infinite enters the battlefield and leaves the battlefield triggers. So if you have something like Impact Tremors, that would kill the opponent right away. So in theory, you could choose 2 Wisp Weaver Angels with Dubious Challenge, and then use your Long Road Home to get back one of them when it enters the battlefield. You'll start that loop and be able to combo off and win. So that's another possibility of something with Wisp Weaver Angel. So that's what I'm thinking in Standard as possibilities for Dubious Challenge. As far as Modern is concerned, we have a lot of the same possibilities. We have cheap cards that can return creatures to your hand. So if you hit 2 big creatures off of Dubious Challenge, you get to keep the one you have, but snap back for free by exiling a blue card, or Saving Grasp, for example, for only 1 mana, even flashing it back it's only 1 mana, you can just bounce the creature that your opponent chose back to your hand, and then you can cast it again the next turn, potentially. So that's one possibility. We also have more exile and return effects. Otherworldly Journey, Turn to Mist, they're literally Long Road Home. Slight differences, but the same thing. Instant speed, just blink something, get it back. Fencer the Sojourner can do the same thing if it's sitting on the battlefield. So what is it you want to get in Modern? And that's what makes this a little bit complicated. In Modern, some of the best targets include Iona Shield of Emeria, which locks the color out of the game, Emrakul, the Aeon's Torn, which is just almost undefeatable. The problem is, with Iona and with Emrakul, they have things that can potentially make them backfire if your plan's to use Snapback or to use Otherworldly Journey. Iona, if your opponent names white when it enters the battlefield, you can't cast your Otherworldly Journey. Emrakul has protection from colored spells, so you can't target it with Long Road Home or any of those effects. I also threw Grizzlebrand up on there just because I wanted to illustrate the riskiness of it. Grizzlebrand is another great creature to cheat into play, but if your plan is to Snapback or Long Road Home, there's going to be a window there where your opponent's going to get to draw a bunch of cards before you get the Grizzlebrand back. So keep that in mind. It's not that you couldn't build a deck, but you're almost going to get a symmetrical effect out of Grizzlebrand, where your opponent's going to be able to draw 7 or 14. Hopefully you can get the Grizzlebrand back on your side of the battlefield, and then you'll draw a bunch, so it's going to give both players a bunch of cards if you go on the Grizzlebrand plan. But there is a way that you can make Iona and Emrakul. Not so much Grizzlebrand. There's not really any way around that window of time for an opponent to draw, but there is a way to make Iona and Emrakul work, and that is to use creatures. So the ideal pile, I think, in Modern with a Dubious Challenge is to exile, let's say, an Emrakul the Aeon's Torn and a Flicker Wisp. So if you exile an Emrakul and a Flicker Wisp, and also Glimmerpoint Stag works the same exact way, if your opponent chooses Emrakul, you get the Flicker Wisp. When the Flicker Wisp enters the battlefield, or the Glimmerpoint Stag, you get to flicker the Emrakul, and then you get the Emrakul back on your side of the battlefield as well. If your opponent chooses Flicker Wisp or Glimmerpoint Stag, well, what do you really care? You got the Emrakul out of the deal. So with that pile, you can pretty much guarantee that you're going to get your opponent's creature back, no matter what it is. The same thing works with Iona. Even if they name white, it doesn't stop Flicker Wisp from entering the battlefield, then you flicker the Iona and get it back. So if I was going to build around it in Modern, that would be the direction I would head. So that is my plan for Dubious Challenge. As I said before, I don't think this is a tier 1 strategy. I think this is more a sweet against the odds type strategy. I also think it could just be a really fun casual deck. I think you could build Dubious Challenge with Flicker Wisps and Glimmerpoint Stags and some really powerful big things like Emrakuls and actually make it work. If you put enough Ionas and Emrakuls in creatures of that power level into your deck, and you have multiple Glimmerpoint Stags, Flicker Wisps, odds will be in favor of you hitting a pair of those. You don't really care if it's a Flicker Wisp and a Glimmerpoint Stag. You don't care which one it is. You don't care if it's an Emrakul or Iona. No matter what combination of those cards you hit, you're going to come out way ahead. So I think there's a sweet casual deck that can be built around Dubious Challenge, and I'm excited to try it out. So I don't expect it to be competitive. Probably not going to win any tournaments because it is a major deck building restriction. But in Modern in specific, there's ways that you can turn this into 4 mana, I get an Emrakul, or I get an Iona, plus you get another creature on top of it, and there's not really much your opponent can do about it if you build the right deck. Anyway, that's been our Brewers Minute for this week. Little bit long, sorry, but I hope this helps clear up some of the misconceptions about Dubious Challenge and gives you some ideas about how to build around it. If you got a sweet Dubious Challenge deck, leave it in the comments, tweet it to me. I would love to see it. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will talk to you soon.